Just for the benefit of our viewers, can you give us a brief synopsis? Because I just think it's an amazing story.
Okay, well, it's basically the story of my parents who moved to, built a mud hut in Zululand and lived among the Zulus and brought us up there, teaching us, my mother taught us at home. And the story of growing up effectively as white kids, but growing up as brought up the Zulu way. And then my move to the city eventually like a migrant worker, and stories related to that.
Because your father was, I mean, you describe your father as he's a man of no fear, an inner calm always, and almost like a rod of steel. So he moves this family into Zululand. I mean, essentially changes your, I mean, the exterior of you is white, but changes your emotional, contextual identity.
Yeah, I think he said he wanted to bring us up ready for life in Africa, and I think that was a combination of understanding Zulu language and culture, but also the place we grew up in was one of the most violent places in Africa at the time, and so we learned other good Zulu warrior traits at the same time.
How has that impacted your life with your brother, and how has it affected your life now?
Well, we've gone very different routes, but I work in the marketing industry, and part of my life is really about creating marketing campaigns, everything from like the Perfect Seshebo show, which is a successful show that talks about Seshebo, and most people don't know what Seshebo is. So understanding cultural elements and bringing those into business. My brother, on the other hand, is still a community worker and does the same work in Msinga still.
And I mean, and how do you, having grown up the way you have, how does it impact TG, on your family? I mean, you mentioned the names of your kids and your day-to-day life now.
Yeah, my brother's kids are Klina and Kubla, and my kids are Zandi and Konsi. And I always have this thing, you know, where people ask Zandi, they say, "Why do you have a Zulu name?" And she says, "No, my father's Zulu." And people come up to me and say, say, "We hear you Zulu," you know. And I say, "No, my mother was Umthembu Mvelase and comes from Singa." And they always look at me and say, "But you know, you don't look like a colored." But when I start speaking Zulu to them, then they're not so sure anymore.
You have an amazing way of describing things. Like there's you know, at some point you have to kind of ask yourself if this is real. Because there's a word you use, you say, skinny bodies with hungry eyes were testimony to our lean diet. Tell me what was happening, because your father died at the age of, he was brutally murdered at the age of 15, but you have an amazing way of using words to describe things that some of us wouldn't have thought of. For example, you were saying that liquid fruit was having a juice was an amazing experience for you guys.
Well, we grew up exactly like the local kids. I mean, my parents had this mud hut and no running water, so we walked down to the river to go and wash. And we ate and, you know, lived like the kids. We climbed in the mountains, herding goats, chasing down little rats and skinning them and eating them. So we were completely like that. In fact, every time we'd go to town and there'd be meat, we'd ask my parents what died, because the only time we had meat was when something died. So, and we were completely like the local kids, barefoot and probably almost as brown as them at the time.
So at 15, your father gets murdered by the very tribesmen that he moved the entire family to protect and work for. What was happening then?
So there was a lot of, my father was fighting a lot of the kind of police brutality. A lot of the local white farmers were involved in a lot of also brutality. And at the same time, there was a lot of faction fighting. So it was a kind of a combination of this of all these elements, and he was involved in trying to stop one of the faction fights, one of the fights between two tribal groups, but at the same time he had made a lot of enemies. So basically he was set up in an assassination related to the work he was doing, but hidden under this kind of faction fight and tribal warfare.
What is the journey you want the reader to go on, Gigi? Because for me, I must admit, when I went through the book, for me it was more like, wow, I didn't know that these stories exist, and I don't know how unique your story is, but it's pretty unique to me because I've never heard of this kind of story before.
So I think for me it's about about this third world journey, you know, from these tribal people who living like almost they did in Shaka's time, all the way through to arriving in the first world and living like a warrior on one level and arriving in the city. You know, they call it Gwandongaziyatuma, you know, the wall's thunder in Johannesburg, and arriving in this scary city. And entering the first world, and my life really followed that whole experience. But there's a lot of adventure as well, you know. I think there's some fantastic adventures and scary stuff and gunfights and a whole bunch of things that go with it. But it really is that journey from this kind of third world traditional Zulu environment all the way until you know, arriving in the city and what it means to arrive in the city and these invisible places, you know, like JP Hostel in downtown Joburg, which is this amazing kind of lively place. And so it's those kind of different places that people have never heard of or thought about.
Contextualize your reality for me, because you grew up playing in the dirt with there was no skin or color issues, and then you grow up and you move into the city and you come and work here where racially we're still, although we've moved a long way from 1994, we're still trying to identify ourselves from a racial perspective, and now we're trying to kind of meet each other halfway and in this new democracy. Where do you find yourself, because you're a bit of an enigma, aren't you?
Yeah, you know, it's very difficult because, you know, on one hand, you know, I look like this and I look like any other white guy, I guess, and on the other hand, you know, I come from a very culturally Zulu background, and I mean, when I talk to my brother, we talk to each other only in Zulu, and you know, so it's these two different worlds, and you know, I think for me, the race issue is such a sad thing in this country, because actually it's about culture, and if I think and I speak, and culturally I've grown up in a certain environment, it's not about just being white, it's that I can move between different worlds seamlessly and understand those different worlds and feel as comfortable in either as much as the other, whether it's a white world or a black world.
What has the reaction been to Third World Child? Because I do see you quote Johnny Clegg, and they've had a famous song related to the same concept. What has the reaction been when people pick up this book?
So I think people expect to kind of hear a story about a child growing up in Zululand, and
I expect the story of a white family living in Zululand. I didn't expect of a family completely emerging themselves.
I think that's a lot of it. People can't believe that it's true, and also I think that people don't expect the amount of adventure and action, and you know, I get told it's like a Wilbur Smith, you know, but and is it true? Because there is a lot of action and adventure, and you know, I've been involved in some amazing stuff, like, you know, I was held up on my bicycle and had a shootout with the guys, and ended up in court where I said to the magistrate, can I translate for myself? Because I was unhappy how the translator was translating Zulu, and translated my case for myself, you know. So, yeah.
Is this going to be turned into a movie? Has anybody approached you, or is there plans to turn it into a movie? What's going to happen?
No, I don't know about that yet. But you know, you're not the only person who said it should actually be a movie, but not yet.
No, I think it's going to be a movie. Gigi Alcock, thank you very much for putting together something that I consider everybody to get. It's going to spark a huge debate around the table.